Make sure your insurance doesn't come up short. Get gap cover with ALA. For more information, follow the links in the description. Hello everybody. If I were to tell you about a 20-year-old car built in Italy by hand with an all carbon fiber body, a V8 engine and made in extremely low quantities, you'd automatically expect it to be the likes of a Pagani, a car now worth millions. You certainly wouldn't expect it to be a Rover. Oh, right, okay, it's an MG. More specifically, this is the MG XPower SV. There are only 82 in the world, and it might be the maddest, coolest thing that MG Rover ever built. And today, I get to drive it. The origins of this car actually take place back in the early 1990s with an entirely different manufacturer, Tomaso, who produced their Bigua concept car inspired by, of all things, the sports cars of Britain, notably the TVR Griffith. As the story goes, the man most directly responsible for what the car was to become is one Giordano Casarini. Formerly of Maserati, he was then poached by Alejandro Di Tomaso, who by this point in time was already suffering from ill health but wanted to make sure that his company had a future. And so they joined forces, Casarini was released from his service at Maserati, and they began building a car in the tradition of Di Tomaso's of old, combining Italian flair, construction and know-how with durable, dependable American V8 power. The Bigua concept finally appeared at the 1996 Geneva Motor Show, where it caused something of a stir. It had a very unusual folding hardtop arrangement with a part manual, part automatic mechanism, and the styling overall, penned by one Marcello Gandini, was considered somewhat divisive. However, there were enough people showing interest that Di Tomaso decided it was a project he wanted to pursue, but he simply didn't have the funds. So he partnered with Qvale, famous not for building cars, but instead selling them, having helped brands like Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar, Jensen, Lotus, and more sell their cars in key markets, particularly the USA. Their one and only experience of production thus far was for the ill-fated Jensen Healey of the 1970s. Unfortunately, in the midst of negotiations, things turned sour, and Di Tomaso decided to part ways, with Qvale continuing the project under their own name, and along the lines, it became known as the Mangusta. The chassis was formed using laser-cut folded steel, with double wishbones at each corner, effectively old-school Formula One technology. Not exactly cutting-edge come the 1990s, but very well suited for a car built in low numbers. And, unlike many cars of this type, the Qvale Mangusta actually made it to production, with just over 280 being sold. Of course, that's better than nothing, but unfortunately, it just wasn't good enough. And so, come the turn of the millennium, and the bosses at Qvale approached the most unlikely of places. Nick Stevenson of the newly formed MG Rover, itself having just been rescued from BMW in a somewhat controversial move. And they wanted to know if MG Rover could help them sell the car to the European market. But by the time negotiation was finished, what instead happened was MG Rover had purchased the entire thing, a lock, stock and barrel. So what they now had, for allegedly just £7 million, was the rights and tooling to build a car that they could sell to the USA. To announce their intentions to the world, MG Rover took their first concept, then known as the X80, to the Geneva Motor Show. And it was a date to remember. September the 11th, 2001. So, as MG were trying to announce a bold, brave new start for the company, nobody was watching, as their eyes were all focused on events elsewhere. But, of course, behind the scenes, things had to go on. In concept, the job that MG Rover had was a very simple one. If you were able to keep all of the key hardpoints, the chassis, suspension, and some of the crash structure largely intact, then the job of rehomologating the car for the USA would be a very easy one. A much trickier task instead was to make it look like a genuinely new product. Many companies and people were spoken to. Allegedly, TWR were chiefly behind the design of the original X80 concept, but having spent a lot of money, ultimately they did not pursue it. In the end, the task of designing the car was given to Peter Stevens of McLaren F1 and Lotus Esprit fame. He was approached by MG, who said, "If we give you 10 million quid, what can you do?" And he said, "Give me 14 months and I will give you a car you can drive." And true to his word, not long later, that's exactly what he did. For reasons of both practicality and expediency, many parts were reused from other manufacturers, including the existing 4.6-litre Ford Modular V8, the wing mirrors from a Rover, the front lights from a Fiat Punto, the heater controls from a Maserati, off-the-shelf Recaro seats, but there are still plenty of bespoke components, including the entire body. Clearly inspired by the Max Power and Fast and Furious era. It even includes a great big rear wing, which apparently does nothing at all. And the idea with this was it was the kind of car that you were to look at and it would look back at you and say, "If you don't like me, I don't care." I think it does the job quite well. It is also an example of car that was somewhat common for that era, where ambition and foolhardiness did collide. Because though what they had here was very much a running, going concern, the marketing bods at MG Rover had even grander ideas. And when they announced it, they said, not only will you be able to buy it with this 4.6-litre 320 horsepower V8, you'll also be able to get a 5-litre 385 horsepower variant, which later appeared as the SVR, and should you want, you could have it with anything up to 1,000 horsepower, courtesy of a nitrous kit and various other modifications. That later turned out to be the work entirely of the marketing department, and allegedly one owner actually tried to order it only to be told, "Don't do that, sir, it won't work." The production process is also the stuff of automotive legend. All of the carbon fibre body panels were made by a company on the Isle of Wight, whose chief business was building the blades from wind turbines. These were then shipped in refrigerated vans to Italy, where they were put in an autoclave and then attached to the body, still being built at the same shop who built it for Qvale. It was all put together, combined with the engine, and then returned to England for trimming, finishing, and effectively being sent to sale. In spite of this though, and the many oddities involved in building a car like this, they worked out that at £60,000 for the base version and £65,000 for the R, they could still make a tidy profit. In its day, the obvious competition for the car would have been the likes of the TVR Cerbera, much cheaper at around £45,000, but certainly nowhere near as well built or as exotic. The same could also be said for the Noble M400, which was £56,000. A bigger problem though, the Maserati Coupe, the 4200, which was also £56,000, and of course the Porsche 911, which was £61,000 and had a Porsche badge on the front, a better dealer network, and far greater prestige than MG could ever hope to achieve. But still, what they had here was something genuinely special and different. Sadly, the powers that be decided that a tidy profit wasn't enough, and so the regular SV debuted at £75,000, with the R coming in at £83,000. This was also a company that you could walk into a showroom for and buy a car for just £8,000. The notion that those customers and those buying this wanted the same experience, I think, was always going to be a tricky obstacle to overcome. Perhaps the craziest part of this entire story, though, is the fact that when in 2005 the administrators arrived to wind up MG Rover's affairs, they actually discovered that the SV project was being run as an entirely independent entity, under a company called MG Sport and Racing. and it was actually turning a profit. They weren't selling many, but they were making money. However, the logistics and the optics of trying to keep that running while the rest of it was shut down proved too complicated. And so it, along with the rest of MG Rover, was finished. While doing my research for this car, I managed to find a website which lists as accurately as they can the specification and the fate of every single one of the 82 XPower SV and SVRs ever built. A great many of them went to dealers and were then summoned back by the administrators. A few were even left unfinished and then completed a number of years later. This particular example, as you may have already noticed, with its 08 number plate, was not registered until 3 years after the factory shut its doors. It was apparently almost complete at the time the factory shut down, with minimal work chiefly to the electronics being required to get it going. And today it is in the hands of a lovely chap called Nick, who, like me, has a thing for Larry's shirts and is also very generous because he is allowing me to drive this car in spite of the fact it has on the odometer just over 4,000 miles. So, what's it really like? Let's find out. Well, the first thing you notice about the MG SV when you press the completely unmarked starter button down here is just how quiet it is. For something that looks this wild, I did expect it to sound a bit more raucous. Now, some owners have fixed that, but this one is entirely standard. I also love these seats. Gorgeous Recaros with a very clever little seatbelt system here that's kind of half harness, half 3 points. So the shoulder straps, they adjust automatically, but the lap straps, you've got to adjust them manually. The interior too, though yes, sure, it is a hodgepodge of bits from just about everything you can imagine. It smells glorious, and there's plenty of nice materials, combination of leather and Alcantara, and the pièce de résistance, this exposed carbon fibre, which hides an integrated roll cage. Kind of like a Noble, but proper. Visibility out is also surprisingly good. Yeah, sure, the rear view is bisected by the massive wing, but straight ahead you can actually see a fair bit more of that bonnet than you might expect. It feels like you sit a little bit too high, but it's okay. Headroom in here is a touch limited, and I am quite close to this section here, which famously, of course, Mr. Clarkson found out is not soft. I also adore the little skunkworks touches, like the fact that behind these little air vents here, which I'm sure are the same ones that Lotus were using on the Evora years and years later, you can just see big pieces of welded metal with a little opening for the air to come through. Fabulous. It's got a real sort of race car for the road vibe in a lot of this car. The whole thing honestly does feel a little bit like a kind of homologation special. Now, storage in the boot isn't great. It's a very odd size, partly thanks to the fuel tank, but you have got quite a bit of storage behind you. So in general terms, if you did want to do some mileage in it, you could. Dampers naturally are passive, and they're actually a bit softer than I was expecting. For some reason I thought this was going to be rock hard, and though you can certainly feel quite a bit, it's not that bad. What's it like though when you want to have some fun? Let's find out. Pace is actually pretty decent. Engine responds beautifully. It hasn't got masses of power or torque, particularly here in base guys, but it's pretty sprightly still. It's not exactly a flyweight, tips the scales at 1,580 kilos. The body might be fancy, but the chassis is not. However, it does feel really light on its feet, and when you see it in person, looks very compact too, extraordinarily muscular. The biggest problem, I think, for performance is the fact that third gear is very long. Apparently it's quite a popular thing for owners to do, change that to something a little shorter. First and second are absolutely fine, but third then just feels like the gulf is enormous. I mean, so I'm at, let's say, 5,000 RPM in second, change to third, and I'm down to 3. However, I am extraordinarily grateful not just to Nick for bringing this car out, but also having it with a set of fresh Michelin tyres on. They're only a couple of years old, and when he got this car back in 2020, it had the originals on. Likely because the car had only covered 2,300 miles in the first, well, near 15 years of its life. And that, sadly, is not uncommon for these things. Now, as you can imagine, with it being a bit of a parts bin special, there is lots that you can get, but there is also quite a bit you can't. It is also from the seat fairly easy to see why it is they didn't fly off the shelves. There are big gaps over here between the pieces of trim, and the trim that is here does feel like it's going to come off with the lightest of touches. Things like the headliner and that, they're not particularly well installed. Beautiful materials, badly put together. The classic British way. And it's so fascinating, isn't it, that this is a car which started life as an Italian take on a British sports car and then wound up being a British sports car built in Italy with an American engine thrown in just for good measure. And because I know you want to know, let's see how the MG SV fares in my patent-pending 3-point turn hill start torture test. Oh, terrible. The turning circle in this is utterly abysmal. I think it might be some of the worst I've ever experienced. And MGs generally are not that good. Yeah, visibility is actually pretty good for your rear three quarters, but oh wow, that's bad. All right, let's get back on the road and have a bit more fun. Tell you what, there's a lot to really like about this car. The brakes, fantastic. Pedal feel is beautiful. Stopping power is sensational. The feel is very familiar to anyone that's driven a TVR Tuscan. The gearbox too, absolutely excellent. I might not be happy with the ratios, but the feel is gorgeous. Nice short throw, very precise, almost no play in it. The suspension as well, it's actually doing a really good job. Now I'm up to sort of 60 mile an hour or so. It flows with the road really well. There's a lot of sports cars of this era where they just made things far, far too stiff and they're very unpleasant. The engine too, it's a Mustang engine. What can you really say about it? It's not exciting, but it does the business. The red line here is set just south of 7,000 RPM. It's got a good spread of torque. Response is beautiful. And you know what? Yeah, there's a couple of little rattles behind me, but by and large, actually, I'm quite impressed with the thing. There is one element in particular which is really letting the side down, though. That's the steering. It's just a bit limp and lifeless. Feels actually quite like many a modern car. It's very filtered. I'm not really getting much information at all coming through it. That is a real key part of this package, which I have to say I just thought was going to be good, and yet for some reason it's not. All right, let's test out that turning circle again, shall we? And while I'm waiting to do that, if you're thinking of what to buy yourself or a good friend for Christmas, how about a NOVE watch? In today's video, you will see me wearing their range-topping Modena 500, a limited edition inspired by the world of the Italian automobile. For more information on it and the full NOVE watches range, check out nove.com, and for a JayEmm exclusive discount, use my code in the description down below. I'm having a great time here. I'll tell you something, when I did my drive-bys earlier, seeing this car in motion, it looked sensational. Up close and personal, yeah, there are a few details that always did look a little bit iffy. In person, I think it actually wears its lines a bit better than it does in photographs. However, it's that low-slung, big arch, unashamed boy racer look about it that makes it just feel so impossibly cool when you see it going past. Nick has a few cars, got a bit of an eclectic collection actually. He likes interesting engines, but he says there is nothing he has ever driven that gets anywhere near the response this does. And I can believe it. You know the thing that with this car that I'm just kind of struggling to put together? It feels like something that just isn't sure what it wants to be, because even the handbrake actually works. I'm very impressed. In so many ways, this just looks like a proper homologation special. It actually reminds me a little bit of the old E46 M3 GTR. It's the arches, honestly. But they've also tried to then make it nice and luxurious inside, probably to help justify the price point. However, the net result is a car which is neither raw, raucous and shouty as you'd expect a proper road racer to be. At low RPM, most of the noise in here comes courtesy of the tyres, not the engine. But the quality of the interior, the fit and finish, isn't even good enough to compare with a Maserati of the day, and that's not a particularly high bar. It genuinely does feel like a product made by a company which was a little bit lost at sea. Clearly the result of some proper passion, and I just love the fact they made it, but I don't think they knew what to do with it. I really feel like it actually shouldn't have been an MG at all. This should have been its own brand entirely. I think the idea was that here what they were going to do is use the SV to lift up the MG brand. Instead, what I think happened is MG dragged down the SV. It is a mystery to me when you just look at the Qvale Mangusta that MG couldn't shift at least as many of these. Would it have helped if it had even more power? I don't think it would, particularly at the prices they were charging. You start getting to £100,000 and it's going to be very difficult to persuade anybody to buy one of these and not a 911 Turbo or an Aston Martin. I also don't think it would have helped their cause when someone thinking of buying a car for £83,000 would have opened the door to see a mirror switch they'd recognise from a Rover 200. That's really poor. And though sure, for the money spent, all in I think maybe about 20 million quid, MG got an awful lot here. They clearly never got their money back, not even close to it, and that's money that I think could have been spent on improvements, particularly to the interior of the other cars in the lineup, that might have made a big difference. Is this a brilliant car? No, not at all. Is it a good car? Just about. The truth is, it's imperfect. It is overflowing with character and passion, and yes, that is a polite way of saying it's got a lot of character flaws, but I'm just happy that it exists at all, and even happier there are people in the world like Nick who'll take the car out, and best of all, let me drive it. I thought I was going to dislike this. I thought it was just going to be horrible, stiff, bouncy, and not pleasant at all. Instead, I'm charmed by it. And that I did not expect. Anyway, I want to say a huge thank you once again to him for bringing the car out, to Peter Stevens for spending some time on the phone with me last night talking about the process behind it, and of course, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.